Welcome to Judaism Demystified, a podcast for the perplexed. Join us as we explore some of the most fascinating Jewish and Torah-related topics with our esteemed guests. By tackling some of the biggest questions you likely won't find addressed elsewhere, we aim to shed light on important issues and inspire a return to the fundamentals. Enjoy the show. Thank you for joining the Judaism Demystified podcast. We are honored to have Rabbi David Aaron. We want to talk about the phenomenon of the off the Derekh situation that happens and affects many communities. Before we begin, can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background and why you're passionate about this subject as well?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me onto your podcast. A little bit about myself. I guess if I had to sum up who I am in a couple of words, I would say I'm a son of a survivor. So much of who I am and what I do goes right back to that. My mother was a survivor from the concentration camp. My mother never spoke about the concentration camp. She just screamed about it in the middle of the night. I woke up one night to my mother screaming in the middle of the night, and that night I was bombarded with questions. Is there a God? And if there's a God, is he good? And if he's good, why is the world so bad? And if we're the chosen people, I wish he chose somebody else. And so already from a very young age, I was set up to be a philosopher. I was tormented by questions. And I've so far written 8 books, but I already have another 3 pretty much completed to come out sometime soon. And all the books I write are not because I think there's a bunch of people out there that have questions. There's a person inside of me that has a lot of questions. And so I share my struggle, my questions, my journey, and so far a lot of people resonate with that.
Wow. Yep. So what do you see as the primary reason individuals leave the Orthodox path, and how have modern influences like digital culture played a role?
Well, I don't think there's one answer that fits all, but I think so far, whoever I've met that have left the path, it generally started off with, I'm not enjoying this. I don't love this. I find this oppressive, restrictive. I think there's a better life another way. I have rarely met somebody that had started off with, I really love living my Jewish life. I'm just philosophically challenged, and I read a tremendous amount of books and did a lot of research, whether there's a God and whether God gave the Torah at Sinai. I've personally never met anybody like that. I'm sure there are people like that, but I've never met somebody that has started off as a purely intellectual endeavor, and yet they were very, very satisfying spiritually, inspired by their Judaism, but they were just riddled with this question and this quest, and they did all the research and came up with their conclusions. So far, most people I've met, it starts off with, I don't like this. I think there's a better life, and I want that better life. And the digital world is very magical in that it's offering us an alternative in a lot of people's minds of something more fun, more expansive, more uplifting, more empowering. And I think if anybody has left the path of Judaism, it's because I think they got the wrong Judaism. I think they got a bad deal, and the depths of Judaism and the beauty and the joy of Judaism was not properly clarified to them, or more problematic, they just were in a home where it was not a pleasant experience.
Makes total sense.
It really does.
I mean, I can give you a story. I got a call from a fellow up north in Israel that his son has stopped keeping Shabbat, and he's told that I could speak to his son and maybe make some progress with him. And I said, I probably can't. And he said, no, I heard that you can. He has a lot of philosophical questions about Shabbat. I said, my guess is he doesn't. He said, no, he says he does. I said, look, if you want to come down, I won't charge. It's my kindness. I'd be happy to help, but I don't know if I can. So they came and I asked the father if I could speak to the son privately. The son was 18 years old. And I asked him, I understand that you're no longer keeping Shabbat. Can you share with me why? And he said, well, it doesn't make any sense. So I said, how many books have you read about Shabbat? None. How many conversations have you had with any rabbis about Shabbat? I had a little bit of a conversation with my rabbi, but not a lot. I mean, how many hours? Oh, no, not hours, more like minutes. I said, well, my guess is you just don't like Shabbat. Is it like really unpleasant at home, like a lot of screaming and a lot of threatening? He said, yeah, you've been to my home. I said, no, but I've heard that before. He said, yeah, it's a terrible experience. A lot of yelling at the Shabbos table. Everybody's got to sit quietly and sit at the table and just it's just not a pleasant experience. Just a lot of yelling and a lot of forcing and a lot of yes sir, but I don't want to do this. He said, and my siblings don't want to do it. I said, so basically, you don't have a philosophical problem with Shabbat. You just don't like it because the way it's being celebrated in your home is not a celebration, but actually some form of torture. And he said, yes. I said, well, okay, well, then I don't blame you. I understand, but don't say it's a philosophical problem. And maybe we could talk to your parents and see how we could, make the Shabbat a beautiful, uplifting experience. He said, well, good luck to you. Well, then the father came and I met with the father privately and he said, well, did you solve my son's philosophical problems with Judaism? And I said, I apologize, but he doesn't have philosophical problems with Judaism or Shabbat or any part of Judaism. He has a problem with you. And that was very hard for him to hear. And I said, he just says that there's just a lot of yelling and a lot of unpleasant kind of forcing. I've heard that story before, so I'm afraid that's not so uncommon.
I'm curious to know your thoughts on why the differences between, let's say, like we grew up in a Spartic community, and we don't really see this off the Derekh kind of phenomenon happening. Not to the extent that we see,
I wouldn't
let's
say
say,
never, but it's
yeah,
less common.
it's a lot less, and I notice like just from our community, like when you talk about the stringency, let's say like upbringing at home, we go to a shul where like the kids run around and they play with balls and they're roughhousing and there's some talking in shul. The vibe is very much like this is our second home. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say, but in when grew up in like Ashkenazi, we would go to Ashkenazi friends for Shabbat or something. It was very different feeling when we'd go to their shuls. It was very different. I don't know if you think that has anything to do with it, but I'm just wondering why you think there are differences in like we see, let's say, for example, a very large percentage of the Ashkenazim going off the derech versus Sephardic families.
Well, honestly, I'm married to a Sephardia. I'm coming from a very Ashkenazic background, and my wife is Sephardia. And what can I say? The Sephardic community very often just has more joy, more flow, more spontaneity. Even even the way the Rav Rashi dresses is a lot more. I don't know. It's not that black and white look. It's something very
Vibrant.
regal and beautiful, and even the food. The Sephardic food. There's something about the Sephardic community. Possibly it has to do with the toll of galut. I don't know how much the Sephardic community suffered the Holocaust. More the European community suffered the Holocaust. I think the Sephardic community had to deal a little bit more with the Islamic culture rather than the Christian culture, and I think that had a big re difference in terms of the Ashkenazic community reacting to and protecting themselves from the Christian community. So I think it became a lot more tighter. One of my teachers said that essentially the conflict with the Muslims is more centered around the land of Israel. So when the land of Israel wasn't so much the issue, there wasn't that much conflict or concern. But with the Christian community, the conflict is right there with the religion itself. And so that was what one of my teachers said. But again, I think if you keep it positive, thank God all my children are passionately, lovingly living a Torah life. And I was on my way to Turkey as a scholar resident, and I called all my kids Friday morning to bless them for Shabbat. It was just an hour flight from Tel Aviv. And my daughter said to me, she said, can I ask you, Abba, why is it, the community that she's in right now, there's a lot of kids going off the Derekh. And she, Baruch Hashem, has 8 children herself. And she said, how is it that in our family nobody went off the derech? And I said, you know what? I think maybe because we always kept it positive. Shabbat for me was let's have fun, let's enjoy this, and turn it into something where the kids will want to be at the Shabbat table, not feel they have to be at the Shabbat table. And my daughter said, Abba, that is so true because Friday morning, or actually Friday afternoon, when we get out of school, all my girlfriends were talking about what are they going to do tonight, Friday night? How quick can they get out of their home and meet each other, in the street, in the old city I live in the square. And, and they were planning, what are we going to do tonight? And they say to my daughter, well, so what would you like to do tonight? She said, look, I don't know what you're going to do tonight, but I know what I'm doing tonight. I'm with my family. I like being with my family. And she said, like, a lot of the girls couldn't wait to get away from their Shabbat, dinner table and get outside with their friends. And our kids liked hanging out with us and enjoyed it. I think as much as I've written all these books on philosophy, but bottom line, if they don't love it, they won't live it.
That's
The
it
next
really
point.
might be one of the most important points ever brought out in the whole. It's Judaism is we have to give them a Jewish experience, not just Jewish ideas. It's really what it
Absolutely, and it's gotta be, positive. Keep it positive. When the kid feels don't do this and don't do that, and you can't do this and you can't do that, it's like I'm not saying that we should compromise
of
the
course,
boundaries of Jewish law.
of
But
course.
there's a way and a time to introduce that. And wherever you're able to be lenient, again, within the context of genuine halakha, I think we should try to do the best before yeah, I'll give you an example. I was at someone's home for Friday night dinner, and he's a very, very successful businessman. But I say that because he was such a poor father and such a failure to father. Because at the Shabbat table, and there was all these guests, he turns to his son, Jeffrey, and he says, Jeffrey, uh, I would like you to give a Dvar Torah, a word of Torah, to our guests. So the boy said, Daddy, I don't have anything to say. So the father says, no, please, I want you to say something. Have Rabbi Aaron here. Please honor Rabbi Aaron with some words of Torah. The boy's getting more uncomfortable. He says, Daddy, I really don't have anything to say. And so the father says to me and everybody else at the table, can you understand that? I pay $25,000 a year for his Jewish education, and I can't get a lousy Dvar Torah from him. I
Mm.
mean, he embarrassed his son in public. I'm sure he would never do that to a client. He would never get so far if he ever did that with his client. And so, how's this kid supposed to feel about Shabbat, about Judaism, if it became such a point of embarrassment and shame?
That's such a good point.
Such a good point.
Yes, we unfortunately I've seen stuff like that happen. It's very tragic.
Thank you for
Look,
this very
I
important
was in
reminder.
I was in a shul the other day, and they were saying Kaddish, and there was a little boy there, maybe 11 years old, not even 13 yet, and he didn't answer Kaddish. And the father slapped him over the face and said, say Kaddish. You're not answering Kaddish. Like,
No.
you know what? I don't think that's gonna get him to want to, answer the Kaddish. I don't even know if he'll say Kaddish. I may have a stream for his father if that's the kind of trigger he has with his Judaism that I should get hit over the face because I didn't answer to Kaddish.
Yeah, when I'm hearing you say this, I'm wondering if this concept spills over also to how Jewish education in the schools are.
Well, I just had a conversation with someone who's creating an alternative school here in Israel, and And he's just very disappointed in what happened and what is happening to his children. And he said the schools are very much based on Olam Haba and Gehenna. You
Yeah.
know, you're going to get Gan Eden or you're going to get Gehenna. And
Mm,
then there's a lot of screaming and a lot of candies. So I'm not saying that sometimes, maybe a teacher has to raise their voice, although I think that's a huge mistake. I think once you raise your voice at the kids, they know they got you. So I'm not a fan of that. But if it's all about payoff, you're going to go to Gehenna. And I've met people that said they grew up with a Gehenna, you're going to Gehenna Judaism. And it's just, how much can I handle that? It's hard to believe that that's the kind of God that gave us this kind of a Torah.
yeah.
I
Especially when our tradition
fully
teaches
agree.
us we don't do things for the reward. We're supposed to focus on the here and now, and we're not a religion. Even the Torah is kind of implicit, not explicit, when it comes to talking about the afterlife for a reason, right? Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Choose life and good," right? Like it's all about life. It's not about we're not a death
Absolutely.
cult. We're not a death cult. We don't
Well,
believe
well,
we're not worried about these things. We have to live our best life. So that's an excellent point. That totally resonates.
I mean, I think that's really the point. I mean, everybody wants to live alive. I want to live while I'm alive. And if a person feels that living a Torah life is a compromise on how they perceive what it means to be alive, then no matter how many proofs you offer them that this is from God, they don't care because they want a life. And I believe that when Torah is taught properly and when the home has a warm, loving, fun, happy vibe, I think the kids will more likely want to stick with that.
And do you, just speaking about education a little bit further, we went through the yeshiva system, and do you feel like the way the curriculum is set up, it's a little bit, maybe, I guess you could say, falling short in terms of what we should be teaching children? Like, for example, I'll give you a perfect example. Most yeshiva kids I know, at the end of it all, their command of reading Mikra or just speaking Hebrew is very weak, and their view of, let's say, Tanakh is on a second grade level, and they mix up Midrash and Pshat a lot because they were taught it kind of like it was kind of converged. And they're getting into Gemara at a very young age before really understanding who it is and what it is that they're serving, right? Their concept of God is extremely weak and maybe childlike.
The
So
Gemara itself that says you should start with Chamesh ben Chamesh Lemikra, no, and then
yeah,
you build yourself up to that.
exactly.
Right.
So I'm just
Right.
wondering what your thoughts are about the way the
I,
education.
I am challenged. I'm meeting, I have a yeshiva with fellows that have gone through 12 years of day school education, and I am wondering, what's going on. There doesn't seem to be. Again, I'm not in any way criticizing the schools. I don't know all the schools, but I don't know, but what I think needs to be is more emunah, which means more conversation about who is Hashem, who are we, why would Hashem be interested in us, how and why would Hashem give us the Torah, what is the goal of a Torah life? I've asked educators, every company has a mission statement. If we had to write up a mission statement, what would that be? And one educator told me that the goal of living a life of mitzvah is to live a life of mitzvah, and that's it. I said, that's it? Yeah. Another educator told me that the goal of living a life of mitzvah is to fear God. Well, that's really attractive. That's it. Hashem created us and gave us Torahs because he just wanted us to be scared of him. And another educator who was actually the head of a outreach center in a major city in America said that the goal of living a mitzvah life is to make Hashem happy.
Oh,
Hashem's not happy. He needs me to make him happy. And I actually said, we say every day our goal with mitzvahs. How about Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav? Blessed be you, Hashem, who has made us holy through your mitzvahs. The goal is to be holy. Now the question is, what is holy? What does it feel like to be holy? Why would I want to be holy? And to me, I think the basic terminology of Judaism hasn't been clarified for a lot of people. I ask students, what's the difference between the name, the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, the Hey, and the name Elohim or Adonai? They don't know. I asked them, why does Hashem want us to serve him? What is Avodat Hashem? They don't know. I mean, these are like the basics of the basics. And so I meet kids that were taught how to make tea on Shabbat, but they don't know what the point of Shabbat is and what does it really mean to celebrate Shabbat. So I'm afraid that the basics are the most profound and the most essential and yet the most neglected in some schools.
I agree with that because I also feel like there's a term someone once used. They said today it feels like Judaism is like pots and pans, OCD obsession with like a little minutia of the law and all these little, rabbinic, kind of tidbits that people are hyper focused on, but
Yeah.
they're losing out on the big picture and not really understanding like why are we doing this? What is the point of all this? It's kind of just like obsessing over these little details, which are obviously they're important, but if there's no meaning, if there's no real instruction and understanding what it is that we're doing this for, you're risking really, leading people on a destructive path in many ways.
Yeah. I asked one fellow, what school did you go to? He said, I went to Talmud Torture. And my parents belonged to Congregation B'nai Boring. And that's unfortunately that's a joke that people, sadly are saying. So again, God forbid, I'm not criticizing the entire system. I'm sure there's some great schools
Right.
going on and great things going on, but we do see a phenomenon of kids going off the derech and also I want to clarify, I don't think it's always the parents' fault. You could have a home that's got a beautiful, happy Shabbat, but something on the street is calling these kids because everybody wants to feel good about themselves. It's a basic need to feel good about yourself. And you're going to go where you're going to feel the best about yourself. And so if you really, really feel good about yourself at home, then you'll probably be happy to be at home. But if you feel you could feel better about yourself on the street with your friends, then that's a big draw. So and the parents are competing with a big world where people are looking to feel good about themselves. And the sad thing is, I was invited to give a talk at a school about how to make prayer more meaningful and inspirational. And before I gave my talk, one of the older teachers said, "Look, Rabbi Aaron, thank you for coming from all the way from Israel to address our staff, but I just have to tell you, nothing you say will help." I said, "Well, thank you for that vote of confidence. Why are you so sure?" And he said, "Well, because all these kids care about is their new iPhone and their new iPod and their new girlfriend." I said, "You know what? I don't think so. I think all these kids care about is the same thing you and I care about, which is we want to feel good about ourselves. And if they think that a new iPhone, a new iPod, a new girlfriend is going to make them feel good about themselves, well, that's what they're going to do. And if they're sure that davening, praying is not going to make them feel good about themselves, and it's sad, like it sounds very egotistical. Well, so it's all about making people feel good about themselves. But it is the matzav, it is the situation, and Hashem says, "Lekach tov natati lachem," I gave you a good deal, and so I believe that Hashem didn't give us Torah to torture us, and didn't give us Torah to make our life miserable. I believe Hashem gave us Torah to make our lives meaningful and joyful and
Right.
uplifted and empowered, and I think if we present it that way, a lot more are going to want to stick with it.
I think also like the compartmentalization of religion being like we're separating religion from science and wisdom and other wisdoms and technology. The truth is that the Torah should be instruction for the world of business. It should instruct us in everything we do, and we shouldn't be separating the wisdom of Torah and like the mundane life. I think that the problem is that many people, I feel, keep the two separated and they don't understand that like you mentioned the whole thing with kids with technology, like you can you can accept reality that these things exist, and we can use perhaps Torah to enhance our life. We don't have to keep the two ideas separate.
Absolutely. It's called the Torah Chaim. It's called the Torah of life. And one of the objectives of Torah is to infuse this world with the presence of God. And so when a person feels that Judaism is trying to keep them away from this world, something inside them feels, why would Judaism keep me away from this world? Why would God want to keep me away from this world?
Yeah.
And I think they're intuiting something very genuine, that we are supposed to infuse all facets of life with holiness, and we can. And so when a person feels that Judaism is choking them, Judaism is isolating them, alienating them, and separating them from everyone and everything else, something inside them feels like squished and compressed, and I just want to break out of those shackles and be part of something much greater.
Mhm. Definitely.
Yeah, this was an excellent segment. Really appreciate these words. It's important. Uh, we wanted to also equally important. How can how can families navigate the emotional and relational challenges when a loved one chooses a different path?
Well, the standard, and I believe this is the right way to go. You have to love your children. Why is it that Yitzchak loved Esav? It says that he loved Esav. One of the answers is because he knew he needed more love. It wasn't that he didn't love Yaakov, but he saw that Esav was going off the derech. He saw he was a difficult boy, so he realized, didn't love him more emotionally. When Torah talks about love, it's not an emotion; it's an action. And so he saw that he needed more attention. And certainly, when a kid starts going off the derech or goes off the derech, if the parents just, you know say, well, I don't want nothing to do with him. There's no chance of him coming back. Not that way. And so all the more so I think sometimes it has to do with the kids are checking, how much do my parents love me? Do my parents love Judaism more than they love me? And that's what they're struggling with. And so I think a parent needs to set boundaries, and we do have our values, but I still love you. And love is not contingent on you doing what I say. I love you. You're my son. You're my daughter. I love you. And we can agree to disagree, and we should have conversations of how we can best, overlap in our lives. But that's not any. That has nothing to do with I still love you, and I always will love you. You're my son, and I'm committed to you. You're my daughter. I'm committed to you. So I think all the more so when someone starts going off the derech, it certainly would be a mistake to just kind of say, well, goodbye. We're done with you.
So what can like communities do, families and communities do to create a more supportive environment for those who we see are questioning their faith or the religious lifestyle?
Well, I think first of all, we have to create an opportunity where people feel they can actually come to somebody and talk to them without being criticized. Or, a friend of mine, when he shared with his father, he's struggling with whether there's a God. His father said to him, "You're going to Gehenna." That's not an answer. He genuinely was struggling with God in his life, and he was now made to feel that when you ask questions, that's some kind of crime. I have another friend who, when he would ask questions in faith, his father would hit him and say, "Where is your faith?" Well, after you hit me, it's much less now than it was before I even mentioned that I have a problem with faith. I don't know. I think people use force when they don't have any other way to deal with the situation because they don't have answers to these questions themselves. And I think they're often frightened by these questions their kids are asking. And I think if you honor their question and validate their question, I think they'll be more willing to maybe hear some answers.
I think the irony is like our religion is very much for questioning. Like, right, we have the Talmud, we have the Socratic method of questioning and questioning and questioning.
Pesach Seder,
Pesach Seder, we have the four sons,
the
the
Gemara.
Gemara. We have all these things that promote the idea of asking questions, and we see it throughout the tradition. Even our prophets, they're always challenging and
Mm,
questioning.
mm.
And maybe it's the fact that we don't focus on Navi. Maybe that's part of the issue. I think people are not really relating to that aspect of it. I don't know, but I think that even this idea of emunah, the blind faith. You mentioned Christianity before. I don't. That's not what emunah means. If you read it in the Torah, just like the pshat understanding of what it is, it's actually more like faithfulness,
Loyalty.
loyalty, right?
Exactly.
Steadfastness. It's not really faith. This idea of faith doesn't really, the way we understand it is today, is kind of like it feels almost a little Christian.
Oh, it's like I said, the basic vocabulary of Judaism needs to be clarified intellectually, but also experientially. Like what does kadosh mean? Most of the time, the standard answer is separate. Well, why would somebody want to be separate?
Hmm.
Separate from what? And actually, that's not what it says in Hebrew. The Hebrew word is nivdal, not nifrad. Nifrad means separate. Nivdal, actually, probably the closest word to nivdal would be transcendent, which already, whether I understand it or not, sounds a lot cooler than separate, to be transcendent. And, we could have a conversation about what that means. But I ask students, what does the word Baruch mean? And they quickly say, well, it means blessed. And I say, okay, what does blessed mean? And they look at me. Well, when you say, blessed are you, Hashem, what did you just say? We thanked him. No, we got a word for that. He's holy. No, got a word for that too. I'm amazed how few people actually know what the word Baruch means. And so, and that comes up in our prayer over and over and over again. And just goes back to my point that the basics are the most profound, the most essential, and yet seems to be really neglected when it comes down, like there's a scientist that once said, if you want to converse with me, define your terms. And so too, I think a lot of terminology of Judaism, just like you said, the word emunah does not mean faith. It means faithful. Ne'eman, it comes from the word ne'eman. The question is, what does emunah actually mean?
An excellent point.
Yeah.
So, how can individuals and organizations best support those transitioning away from or back into the Orthodox community?
Um, well, it's creating an opportunity for a real honest conversation in a warm environment. For those who want to have that conversation, and somebody that doesn't want to have the conversation, I don't know how you can get someone to talk when they don't want to talk. But I think a lot of people would like to have, even people that have left the path, want to have a positive connection to their heritage. I think still in some deep way, they want to have a positive connection with their heritage. And we have to create opportunities for them to have conversations with people that, again, genuinely honor their struggle or honor their decision. And not honor doesn't mean that I agree, but I honor that that is your decision. And if you're open, I'm certainly open to have a conversation about it. Um, so I also think you mentioned the word experientially because a lot of this is an experience. Shabbat is an experience. Abraham Heschel was contracted by a publisher to write a book about God, and he handed in what became one of his classic works, The Sabbath. And the publisher was surprised by that. We have a contract for a book about God, not the Sabbath. And he said, well, I sat down to write a book about God, and I realized the Sabbath is a book about God. If you want to know God, celebrate and experience a Shabbat. I think we need to bring more of the experiential back to Judaism. Too
Yeah.
much of it's in the head, too much of it's conversation, too much of it is just learning intellectually, but not feeling emotionally and not being immersed in experiences. And that's what I think would be great if we could create more experiential opportunities to encounter Jewish life, take people out to do a spiritual retreat in the country where we learn basics of Judaism. We practice tefillah, prayer in a more meaningful way. But again, we have to restore the experiential side of it, because the word love doesn't mean anything unless you've experienced love. What gives words meaning are experiences. And so even if I were to give you a definition of love intellectually, you still wouldn't get it until you've personally experienced love, because otherwise that word love is just noise. What gives words meaning is the experiences that those words are pointing to. We have to give people an experience of Shabbat, an experience of tefillah,
Yeah.
you know, an experience of what it means to be in the presence of Hashem. What does it mean, the Shekhinah? How do I, may we see your Shekhinah come back? What am I looking to see? What will happen when I see that? What is it that I'm seeing? I mean, going back again to these basics, but not purely intellectually, also intellectually, to open our minds so that we'll be willing to open our hearts experientially.
All this has to be contextualized in, through experience, like you said. The idea of kedusha, I would say even sanctification, right? We sanctify time, even like Shabbat. That should give us an appreciation for the rest of the week. It gives us a break. I speak to people who aren't Jewish who have actually, put away their phones on Shabbat, just doing that. And they're inward thinking, and they're reflecting on their week, and they're spending time with their family. It's a different experience, and it's something that we can actually do very easily if we have the right proper mindset. But as you mentioned, I think the main thing that we're lacking, this is a common theme that comes up in our podcast, is fundamentals.
Yeah.
The fundamentals are just, that's the common denominator we're seeing, is that people are just lacking those. And I do think partly it is due to education. It's due to the fact that, like, for some reason we've moved away from the Navi, that the Nach is something that I don't know why that is, but there's so many powerful lessons and just emotional stories that are just so easy to relate to, and we're just like neglecting it. I don't know the reason for that.
I don't either. I don't know. I don't know why the system became so strongly emphasizing Gemara almost exclusively. I mean, in the yeshiva I went to, we learned Gemara all day long, except for half an hour of halacha before Shachrit and half an hour of Musar before Ma'ariv. Other than that, we studied Gemara all day long. And when I decided on my own that I would learn Chumash every day for an hour, I mentioned that to one of the fellows in the kola of the yeshiva, and he said to me, and sincerely, Bittul Torah, you're wasting time from Torah. He wasn't joking.
That's
no, no, no,
that is
no, no, no.
that is horrible.
Gosh.
Yeah, Torah becomes Bittul Torah. Interesting how that works. Yeah.
It's not even those that learn Chumash. I feel like Chumash, in a sense, is also not learned. It's learned matter of factly. And you see how, like you mentioned, how Midrash converges into the Pshat, meaning this happened, that happened, this happened. And I feel like Chumash is also supposed to be an experience. We're supposed to connect to the text and let the text talk to us. Let the text.
Absolutely. My teacher said what makes the Torah so powerful is not simply what's in the Torah, but what it brings out from us. And we have to encourage the students to also offer their interpretation of what they think the story means to them. Now, of course, if they say something that contradicts a fundamental principle of faith, or grammatically is just unacceptable, but when I was taught Chumash, we would learn Rashi, and we would always ask, what's bothering Rashi? And what I found very interesting, whatever bothered Rashi really never bothered me. And what bothered me didn't seem to bother Rashi, and that really bothered me. The story of Akedat Yitzchak, where a man is being asked to sacrifice a son. Rashi does not address that on some deep philosophical lesson that I can see. He's interested in Pshat. Not that he didn't have that lesson. I'm sure he did, but that was not the point of his of his writings. And so I never was taught Chumash on, and anybody asked me, well, what's bothering you? And what answer could you offer? Let's see what the other commentaries say and see if how they respond to your answer. I wasn't in the learning. I was more an observer in the learning rather than truly a participant. My idea didn't matter and wasn't invited. My teacher said that when you pray, you're speaking to Hashem. But when you're learning Torah, Hashem is speaking to you through the pshat, through the insights that He drops into your head, and that's kind of like a form of nevuah. There's nevuah, but there's prophecy. Then there's bat kol, there's ruach hakodesh, but there's another level of conversation with Hashem, which is called limud Torah, learning Torah. And when you immerse yourself in the text, and something inside you says, maybe this is the point. Who's that something or someone inside you that's giving you that insight? That's a conversation with Hashem. When you pray, you're talking to Hashem. When you're immersed in the learning of Torah, Hashem talks to you.
We really want to thank you for your
Very much.
timely messages and wisdom. And before we go, we want to ask you if there's anything you want to plug, where our audience can find you.
Well, thank you very much. So I have a website, rabbidavidaaron.com, Aaron, rabbidavidaaron.com. I've written 8 books. They're all more in the genre of spirituality, philosophy, what's called Pnimiut Torah, the inner secrets of Torah. And I'm very active on Instagram, Facebook, and so I'm out there on social media. And my website has a very large library of classes that I've given over the years, which are free to download. And yeah, thank you very much.